The Disability and Business Technical Assistance Centers welcome you to the Disability Law Lowdown ASL podcast series. Show 10, Tax Incentives. Hello, and welcome to the Disability Law Lowdown. I'm your host. My name is Danny Worthling. Welcome to this ASL podcast. Today's podcast is about tax incentives. Businesses and employers use them to help reduce the financial costs of complying with the Americans with Disabilities Act. The lawyers want me to be sure to tell you that even though we are talking about the federal tax laws and the Internal Revenue Service, that we are not giving any advice about taxes or tax law. We are just providing information about 2 tax incentives that can help with the cost of compliance with the ADA. You can get more information about these tax incentives at www.irs.gov or by consulting your own tax advisor. 2 sections of the Internal Revenue Service or IRS tax code that we will be discussing are Section 190, which is known as the Architectural and Transportation Barrier Removal Tax Deduction, and Section 44, which is known as the Disabled Access Tax Credit. First, it might be helpful to explain the difference between a tax deduction and a tax credit. Both are ways of lowering the amount of tax you pay to the federal government. How do tax deductions work? For example, suppose you earn $2,000 a month, but instead of paying taxes on $2,000, maybe you only pay taxes on $1,500, which reduces how much you owe. Tax credits are computed after you figure out how much you owe in taxes. It works sort of like a gift card. Suppose you have a gift card for $25. You go shopping and buy something that costs $100. You only pay $75 because you have a gift card for $25. The tax credit works the same way. Like I said, the Architectural and Transportation Barrier Removal is a tax deduction for barrier removal. So, if a business spends money to remove either architectural or transportation barriers, the business can take a tax deduction for those expenses. For example, if a business creates accessible parking spaces in customer parking lots, makes an accessible path of travel from the parking lot to the entrance, installs curb ramps, widens doorways, those are the kinds of barrier removal activities that might fall under this tax incentive provision. The tax deduction can't be used for new construction or even as part of an ongoing alteration. But otherwise, this tax deduction is available to all businesses. And it is an annual deduction that can be used every year for up to $15,000 in covered expenses. The other tax law I mentioned earlier is the Disabled Access Tax Credit. This one applies to businesses with 30 or fewer employees or businesses which had less than $1 million in gross operating revenue the previous year. The tax credit can also be used for barrier removal, but unlike that other provision, this tax credit can also be used to provide effective communication with customers with disabilities, such as the deaf. As an example, if a lawyer has a client who is deaf coming in for an appointment, and the client needs an ASL interpreter in order to have effective communication with the lawyer, then the expense of the interpreter could become a tax credit. For employers, it could include providing assistive technology or adaptive equipment for employees with disabilities. If an employer buys screen reading software to allow a blind employee to access a computer, that expense could also become a tax credit. The tax credit is a little more complicated than the deduction. It doesn't apply to the first $250 of expenses. Then it applies to 50% of the expenses over that, up to a maximum of $10,250. The good news is that you can use both the tax credit and the tax deduction if the expenses and the businesses qualify for both. If you have questions about these two tax laws, you can call the IRS at 1-800-829-1040 or visit their website at www.irs.gov. Thank you. Want to know more? Visit asl.disabilitylawlowdown.com. I hope you enjoyed watching this ASL video podcast. You can subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. You can subscribe for free through iTunes or by going to asl.disabilitylawlowdown.com. The Disability Law Lowdown is sponsored by a network of 10 ADA centers around the country. The ADA centers provide training and technical assistance on the Americans with Disabilities Act and other disability-related laws. You can call us at 1-800-949-4232. That's voice and TTY. The ADA centers are supported by NIDR. Thank you. Host, Danny Worthling. Script writer, Jackie Brennan. Editor-videographer, Beth Case. Sponsored by the ILRU Southwest Rocky Mountain Great Lakes DibTech ADA Centers. Produced by Decker Labs.